Pia Wendelbo is the CEO of Scandinavian Change Agents. She is dynamic and a wealth of expertise. Pia helps coach individuals and organizations on something that is really, really hard for so many of us: change. Pia takes a person-centered focus and integrates research from neuroscience and behavioral science to offer data-driven solutions. Today, Pia chats with us about the intersection of leadership, innovation, and awareness. Hello, and welcome to the Communicative Leader, hosted by me, Dr. Leah O'Million-Hodges. My friends call me Dr. O. I'm a professor of communication and a leadership communication expert. On the Communicative Leader, we're working to make your work life what you want it to be. So, Pia, I'm so excited to have you on the Communicative Leader. You and your company, you have done so much. But before we dive in, can you give me a little bit of background on yourself?
Yes, for sure, I can do so. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really looking forward to our chat here. Right now I'm a change catalyst and a consultant in my own company. But before I was that, I have actually been working in the corporate world for quite many years. So it's not unfamiliar for me to talk about change, I would say.
Yeah, excellent. And one thing, so I was preparing for this interview and looking at what you're doing now. And right now you've founded this consulting firm. You specialize in helping businesses navigate this ever-evolving technology landscape and to achieve digital transformation. So in thinking about this, can you kind of define digital transformation for us and then help us understand, how do we know we've done it, or how do we know we're moving in the right direction?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so you're fully right. Digital transformation it's a huge word, right? But to me, digital transformation has a lot to do with, which of course, as the word is saying, change. But what is change then? So change is, of course, often seen as something to do with technology, right? And that is, of course, part of a digital transformation. But for me, and what I focus a lot about, is actually the human side of this transformation. So I think it's just as important to look at what happens in an organization with the people inside the organization and the leaders of this organization when you're trying to change something. Because from my perspective, when you're trying to implement a new piece of software or a new process or whatever it is, you also have to look at how does this then impact the whole organization, the people in it.
That speaks to me as an organizational scholar, because I think as of late, many organizations still prize their technology over their people. And I understand this is a huge financial commitment, but at the same time, what is that communicating to your workforce? So I love that you put people first.
Exactly. And I think also for having success with your transformation, you still need people, right? So it's awesome to have new technology, but you still need people also to act. And if they don't know how to then implement the new stuff, then you won't have success with your digital transformation, as I see. So for me, it's sort of the people are in the center of this transformation.
Yeah. And so my next question, so of course you've already talked about being a change catalyst, and when we're embarking on these transformations, we know that part and parcel with change. So I imagine you encounter a number of clients, and then you have to help them work through limiting beliefs or old behavior patterns that are kind of holding them back. Can you kind of talk to us about how you do that?
Yes, and of course, like recognizing also that to even get to the point to talk about these limiting beliefs, you need to build trust first, right? Because this is quite personal also for people to get to a point where they're actually willing or to kind of talk to something about this. So usually I always start by figuring out where people actually are when I engage with a new company, a new consulting.
Thanks for that really thoughtful response, Pia. I appreciate that. And I just realized that we didn't finish our previous question. So my apologies. Let's go back to that. I mean, do we ever really arrive at digital transformation, or is it just always ongoing?
Yeah, you're on the right there, Leah, because I see it exactly the same way. Because of course, small
Mhm,
steps forward is a
mhm,
success, but how can you exactly measure have you arrived, on a digital transformation? And to me, you can't. As such, you can never say that you're done, right? Because
mhm,
uh, you aren't. It's going to be something that will keep evolving. So for me, it's more about looking at how you can constantly be in a mode where you are actually capable of changing. So it's about actually
mhm,
implementing both innovation and transformation as part of the
mhm,
way that you work as an organization. So it's a lot about how you actually are capable of adapting over and over again. But
mhm,
then, in terms of how you measure it, there's definitely ways that you can measure, and I would suggest to do that always. So for instance, when I kick something off, I always start with a point of departure,
mhm,
where at some of the stuff that we talk about there is how do we see ourselves succeed, and also
mhm.
how would it look like if we failed? Because those two
Yeah.
questions kind of give quite broad perspectives on where we're
Mhm,
going. And then from that on, then we can start talking more specifically about what kind of goals are we then looking for. And then we can start sort of creating some sub achievements that we can then run for. So it's very important, of course, to have these discussions, and it's important to measure. But being
mhm.
finished, I would say never. Um,
Yeah. And I love that point of departure and kind of doing that initial role playing, almost that forecasting to say, this is ideally
exactly.
where we want to go. This is a success and this would be a failure. And you kind of have these bumpers then to kind of help guide and check in throughout that process. And one
Exactly. And
thing,
also, when you
yeah.
ask that question to a team, you will also get
Mhm,
very diverse perspectives on this particular topic. And that means that you also get the chance to actually align between each person, because if
mhm,
you're not aligned in the team who's running around this, then you are not succeeding either. So it's very important actually also to have that alignment, both with the internal and the external experts, in
yeah.
this case, Eve, right?
Exactly. And when you were talking about this as being ongoing and kind of thinking back to that limiting beliefs or behavior patterns, is that a hard sell sometimes? I imagine for some people, I know in corporate it's check and then moving on to the next. So if this is something that we have to, I mean, I'm sure there are small check marks along the way, but essentially saying we just need to be adaptable, we need to be open. I bet you have to do some work there with people.
Definitely. So I actually, in the beginning of a corporation, I always spend some time on actually interviewing people.
Mhm,
So I usually have quite open dialogue to begin with,
mm,
just to figure out whether we are actually in the same place and what they are actually expecting. So being very open about what do you actually expect to get out of this, because
mhm,
I want to be very open about where we're going, and also to see if they are actually willing
mhm,
to do what it takes. Because working with transformation also means that you, as the one initiating, needs to be quite openly around what you are expecting and where you're achieving things, and also changing yourself, because you might figure out along the way that things needs to be very different from what you sort of expected in the beginning. So you yourself also needs to kind of be willing to go on a kind of a change journey as
mhm,
well. And then on top of that, I always discuss partnership, because to me, this is not just, as you were saying before, some kind of supplier that comes in and just delivers something. To me, this
mhm,
is a true partnership. So we actually need to work on that trust. And when you kind of have that, then it's way easier also to then start talking about this limiting beliefs,
mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So it's about discussing how that happens. And I think, like, the limiting belief in itself, it's something that happens to all of us. I think at some
Mhm,
point we all feel that feeling.
mhm,
So it's also about making it general, making it something that you are not alone, right? So
mhm,
basically, going into the neuroscience part of it, you want the sense of belonging, and when you know that this is not weird or not something that anybody else feels, then it's safer to say it out loud. So it's
mhm,
about giving those examples and actually talking around it in such a way that people feel comfortable in actually putting those things on the table. So it's a lot about the
mhm,
empathy, and how you approach it, I
mhm.
would say.
Yeah. And I'm listening to it. I'm just thinking, I want you to come to my organization, any organization I work in. Just the fact that you have these conversations and they're not done. It's this ongoing and recognizing, you know, no one likes to feel isolated. No one
No.
really thrives when they're siloed. And this helps, in addition to the digital transformation, just the human communication aspect of your work is really phenomenal. So thank you for that.
You're
So,
welcome.
yeah. You just kind of touched on that neuroscience. And my next question, I really love this that you're integrating neuroscience and behavioral factors. So, can you discuss with us any specific techniques or strategies you use with your coaching or mentoring that are grounded in neuroscience or behavioral research?
Yeah, for sure. There's quite many different models. Of course, it depends a
Hmm.
lot on the specific situation, what I choose to bring in. But one simple model that I usually use at some point, at least, is what I call the BFA model: behavior,
Hmm.
friction, solution.
Hmm.
And that means that when we're kicking off this transformation, then quite many leaders, they don't really realize, what is it actually that we are after. We just want some new process to work very nicely, right? Or new system to work nicely. But then we are not looking behind the wheels of everything. So what I'm trying to put on the table here would actually be, what kind of behaviors are we actually looking for here, to really dig down and then see, okay, what did we do before? What do we want people to do now for the
Hmm.
future? So being quite specific, I would say, actually. But what happens when you are actually really digging deeper and trying to understand these behavioral things, then it makes it more obvious for you to then go to the next point, looking for frictions, because that's
Hmm.
very important, right? You need to
Hmm.
understand exactly what kind of frictions could there actually be for implementing this particular thing. It can be a customer journey. It can be something internal in the organization, because that's another thing I also see, that of course it's very popular to look at the customer journeys, which are super important, of course, right?
Hmm.
But what I often see lacking is then when you are then really focusing on creating the best possible customer journey, then you kind of tend to forget what's going on behind the wheels, right? So the
Hmm.
employee journeys are just as important in this
Hmm.
as well. And for managers and C levels as well, they need to understand that just putting a new system or a new function or a new culture, whatever it is that you're trying to transform here, it will have a huge impact on each person in the organization. So understanding those small frictions is very important. So really going down and understanding, asking, being curious, investigating, sitting in the same chair as those people, understanding the process is quite important. And then when we have the frictions, then you can start figuring out concrete solutions for each friction.
Hmm.
So even though it might seem, whoa, this takes some time. Yes, it does, but it's slow is fast in this case, I would say,
Yeah.
because that's actually where you find your success. If you really understand those fictions, and then you are able to find
Mhm.
solutions for each one of them, then you have a far better chance of having a long-term sustainable change.
Yes. And I love that approach. Slow is fast in this case, because you're right. When you're doing it right, there are more steps. But
Hmm.
when we're thinking about the system as a whole and thinking about all of the pieces in the system, like you are finding, you're more likely to have success. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and
Yeah.
forcing yourself to go into those details, like really, okay, what is it
Hmm.
actually we want to get out of this? Many times it can be quite fluffy and very strategic or superficial here in the
Yeah.
beginning, right? But really forcing yourself to go back and go back and go back until you find something that is concrete enough that you can start measuring on it
Hmm.
helps you a lot in this process.
Yeah. Excellent. And I love that connection with the measurement, plus also being there, the feel, and just really capturing in a holistic way what's going on. Follow up question to that. And I think this will be a fun one for you. Thinking about some of the significant changes or success stories that result of incorporating this neuroscience and behavioral factors into your coaching and consulting.
Yeah, so one thing is definitely better decision making, because the more you go into the details and you start understanding how do you actually take decisions, how do human people actually
Mhm.
take decisions. And here we are back to another theory actually of behavioral design called the dual process theory. I'm not sure if you know that one,
Mhm.
but it's system 1 and 2, for instance.
Yeah.
So being able to navigate around that also helps you understand how people take decisions, and that is quite important also in terms of getting everybody to onboard to a change. So better decision making is definitely one thing you get
Mhm.
out of it. I would also say better empowerment and clear sights
Mhm.
in terms of your next move, because understanding and also starting to teach each person in the organization around how you navigate in this change gives everybody more empowerment. So a lot of this
Mhm.
also, instead of you maybe trying to push something sort of on top of your organization, this is also a lot about, as we started talking about, listening
Mhm.
in, understanding, investigating, looking at the different processes and stuff that people are doing. And by sitting there, listening and watching, then you also interact with each person in the organization, and they feel listened to, right? And they feel that they are obligated and allowed to
Mhm.
come with ideas on how this can improve, because those are the
Mhm.
specialists. They are the specialist that sits with the day-to-day tasks. So a lot of
Mhm.
beautiful things happens actually when you start really
Mhm.
engaging with the persons in the organization. So this whole
Mhm.
empowerment and the feeling of you being part of this change really completely changed the way that the
Mhm.
whole organization actually sort of empower themselves into this new
Mhm.
way of working. So that's a
Yeah.
couple of, of
Yeah.
examples.
And I was thinking when you were talking, what a gift to give employees, right? Empowerment, and with that, better decision making. Because I think that so often, especially when we become adults, you don't get a lot of those gifts. You're out of the classroom, you're out of these kind of more traditional systems that kind of applaud you and check in, and there's some things that people do for retooling, but just as a whole, if I felt my voice mattered, people want to listen, I'm empowered and safe to speak up, and I feel like I can trust my decision making processes in a more solid way. I mean, wow, that's really incredible for the employee experience.
Exactly. So that's another thing here. So definitely also see happier employee,
Mhm.
because they exactly are way more engaged and they have a higher
Mhm.
sense of belonging. And going back
Yeah.
again, actually to the neuroscience, we all want to
Yeah.
be belonging, right? We
Mhm.
we want to have that sense of
Yeah.
belonging. So that's quite important actually. So yeah, definitely a very positive upside as well for this one.
Mhm.
And then
Yeah.
high performance teams as well, because you kind of also create the trust, right? And in this process,
Yeah.
when you're really digging deeper and you're also talking about these frictions, and even in the beginning, as we were talking about, like how does failure look like, how does success look like,
Mhm.
you already there showing the team that it's okay to talk about things that could go wrong as well, right?
Mhm.
And if you want to build high performance teams, the trust there in the team needs to be there to tell exactly what's going on. So if you don't believe in the timeline,
Mhm.
if you don't believe that this particular thing we are trying to develop right now works, you should be able to say it out loud, right? Because if you do
Mhm.
so, then you will avoid a huge disaster. You can take them, in the run, which is much faster, cheaper,
Mhm.
and better in terms of change, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Gosh, I'm struck by how so often the simplest things are the most impactful, but we tend to make everything so complicated. And we're like, oh no, I'm gonna blow past that red flag or that internal, like you said, like if I'm in charge of a process and I think there's no way this timeline's gonna work, but if I don't say that, we get to a point where maybe it works, but I am definitely worse for wear because of it. Or more likely it doesn't work and then we're back at ground one again.
Exactly, exactly. But that's a lot to do with what I do, because
Mhm.
it's not necessarily
Yeah,
like difficult as such. But yeah, it's the simple things. But
it's
it's
so
just understanding
powerful.
how we
Yeah.
work, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. So another thing when I was preparing, I was thinking about how you work with clients that maybe struggle with self-awareness, or maybe they've had challenges in working well with others. So from, with your mentor coach, your mentor hat, your coaching hat, how do you approach those interactions?
Yes, also a very good question. I do a lot of different things. I would say, of course, this is also very much to do with the particular person standing there. But again, I try to talk to people around how we actually work as persons. So is it actually confronting that person if there's a limiting belief or some particular thinking that they are stuck with? Trying to figure out what is actually behind that. So where does that actually comes from? Why do we
Mhm,
actually sit with that limiting belief, and can you actually prove
mhm,
it? Because often what I
mhm,
see when you start asking questions around that, it's more in our minds that it's something that we can actually prove. We are just thinking that people perceive us in a
mhm,
certain way, or there's this particular thing blocking us. So most of the time it's just in our mind. So it's about
mhm,
understanding that it's you who can control your feelings, in the end of it, even though you don't feel like in the situation. So it's
mhm,
it's it's about learning those triggers, when this particular flag pops up and saying, hey, you
mhm,
shouldn't do that, or you're not good enough, or whatever it is that
mhm,
that this voice is telling you. Then hey, there's a flag. And then you should allow yourself to say, okay, maybe let's pause for a second here and say, who's actually in charge here? It's me who's in charge of my feelings.
mhm,
So
mhm,
where is this actually coming from? And another very effective thing you can actually do when these things pop up is something quite funny that I usually also introduce. It's this worrying boutique. So it's a boutique of worries,
mhm,
and how our mind works. Right, we pop up with lots of questions and doubts and stuff
mhm,
going around and round and round in our head. Right, but if we can kind of allow them still to be there, but not deal with them right now in the situation, because you
mhm,
actually need your mind to focus on something else right now, right? That is more effective. So you can say to yourself, okay, it's fine that you are feeling this right now, but the boutique of worries are not open
mhm,
before 6 o'clock tonight,
mhm,
for instance.
mhm,
And it might sound a bit funny, but actually, what your mind will do then is that it accepts that, okay, we're not going to deal with this particular feeling right now. We can actually skip. And then for a week or two, you open your boutique at some particular point
mhm,
during the day. And then what happens beautifully is that over a very short period of time, you stop having those worries, because
mhm,
when you then stop and really look at them, they're like, why do I actually feel like that? Okay, maybe it's not that bad,
mhm,
so they become smaller and smaller and smaller, and then in the
mhm,
end, you can really manage it.
mhm.
Does it make sense?
It does. I'm just thinking about how, and I imagine part of why they become more minimal too is they just need to be acknowledged and validated. Like, yes, I hear you, inadequacy. I hear you, fear, but my boutique isn't open until Sunday at 6. So we'll check
Exactly.
in then. And then it's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I've already acknowledged that. And then with time, yeah, I really, really like that idea. That's, and you're right. And it frees you up then to, the meeting or the presentation or whatever decision making is
Exactly.
going on.
And the beautiful
Yes.
part of this is that you're not acknowledging your feeling, right? Because that's not good.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't
Yeah,
acknowledge, then it will keep going, right? So
exactly.
the beauty
Yeah.
here is that you will acknowledge, but not dealing with it right now.
Yep. Yep.
That's the trick.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. I am 100% going to use that. So, my follow up question is pretty similar. So, with this work that you're doing, I imagine a lot of people are connecting with you about career goals, aspirational future
Mm.
places. But how do you kind of help them identify these future places when maybe they're unsure of where they want to go? It's not clear to them yet.
Yeah, exactly. So usually what I do in those cases is that I start talking to people about what do they actually see as stuff they really love doing, because that's quite
Mm-hmm.
an easy place to start. So we usually start digging into that and then trying to identify what kind of task, what kind of particular jobs do you actually really love
Mm-hmm.
doing, like when you
Mm-hmm.
really feel you're in flow. And then I usually
Mm-hmm.
ask them maybe for over a week or two to kind of monitor everything they do, and
Mm-hmm.
then saying, okay, this is something where I really feel I'm in flow. And when I'm talking about flow, I mean you're completely lost in the job, right? You don't
Mm-hmm.
exist in time and space. It's just really good fun to
Mm-hmm.
do this, and you feel that you can just keep on floating. That's when you
Yep.
really feel in flow. And what I often see around this, which is quite interesting, is that a lot of people, they're very good at a lot of stuff, right? And
Mhm.
they're maybe partners, their bosses,
Mhm.
or their colleagues, or whoever in the
Mhm.
company. They force them to do stuff because they are good at this. Oh, you're so good with this
Mhm.
Excel. Please take this task, right? But that
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily mean that you love doing it, right? And there's a
Yep.
huge
Mhm.
difference here. So, what I'm after in this particular exercise is, what do you really like to do? What
Mhm.
gives you flow, motivation?
Mhm.
So that's where we start. And then we also talk about the strength that you have. There's actually some exercises. I can give you links to this afterwards, so you can share that in the podcast. But there's a quite cool tool, American tool actually, where you can actually have a view of what are your top strengths. And then
Mhm.
the beauty of this is that you connect your strengths with what you are then really loving doing, because
Mhm.
that's what you should have more of. And
Yes.
then when
Yep.
you are starting to get a picture of that, then it's going to be so much easier for you then to connect that to what kind of tasks and jobs, careers are you then looking
Mhm.
for.
Mhm.
And then I mix it with kind of your visions, and also what tasks, what you really love
Mhm.
doing in general, like what are your activities, your sort of hobbies, and that kind of thing. So you kind of have a
Mhm.
full map of everything. And then it's really fun, because then you can start playing around and then saying, why am I actually stuck in this particular position or job? It's not,
Mhm.
it's maybe 30% of my time that I actually spend on stuff I really love doing, right? It should be the other way
Mhm.
around.
Yes, exactly. And I love that because I think for so many people it probably feels too heady and too abstract. But when you think of it as a literal, like a puzzle that you can put together, we have
Exactly.
some, strategies you can use, a strengths finder, just daily checking in. What did I really enjoy today? And I think that is so powerful in helping people to recognize there are things that I enjoy, there are things I can lean into. So,
Yeah, and another beautiful thing about this also is that sometimes I have people coming in and then say, oh, I hate my job. I'm so demotivated. I don't really
yeah.
like what I'm doing. But then when we have had all these exercises and gone through this, then they actually figure out, hey, why don't I ask my boss, for instance, or if it's a manager,
Mhm.
why don't I just remake my own sort of daily routines, right?
Mhm.
Because why should I do this when I can do that? And then start interacting with people, because what you find out in a team often is that the things that you might love to do might not be the same things that the other
Mhm.
persons love to do. So if you
Yep.
then in a team start switching and talking about these things and actually building on top of each other's strengths, then it's so powerful in terms
Mhm.
of teamwork as well, because then everybody starts to really do what they love to do and are in
Yeah.
flow. And then the productivity and the quality of what you're building or doing together, it raises tremendously, actually. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of upsides in this. And then maybe you don't even want to shift your job. Maybe it was just because you
Mhm.
were doing different tasks that you didn't love doing. You actually generally love your
Mhm.
job. You just didn't spend time on the right things.
Mhm. And what a powerful message if you can go to your manager and say, I realize I really like A, I don't like B so much. And they say, Pia, you're so wonderful. We want to keep you. Let's figure out how we can get you doing more A. And having
Exactly.
those conversations, I mean, I'm just like, yes, I am valued. I'm appreciated here. What I do matters. And that transforms that work group.
Exactly. Plus, you are also the proactive person, right? So, which
Mhm.
manager doesn't love that? You're not coming
Exactly.
complaining in any way. You're actually coming with a solution. So you are coming showing, okay, I think we should move around this. You will actually get better result out of me if I get to do this and this and this. And I have an idea that maybe this can be taken and done over here, or this can be done here, or maybe we should even stop doing, because that's another interesting thing here as well. What should we stop doing? Because there's also a lot of stuff that we probably shouldn't spend
Mm.
even time on, right? But that's another dialogue
Yeah.
here, but or topic. But yeah,
Excellent. And my follow up question, which is kind of, we've touched on this a little bit, but one thing I'm realizing, and I think this is post, the surge of the pandemic, I'm having a lot of conversations with people who feel stuck or they feel a lack of motivation in their current career. So, are there additional things that they can do to help them rediscover that passion or drive or kind of next steps?
Yeah, I would suggest them to start where we just discussed, like,
Mhm.
what do I actually really love to do? Because as you said, our minds, that's actually going back again to neuroscience. So when you are trying
Mhm.
to step out of something where you don't really know where you're going, right, it can be tremendously hard, and that taking that first step is sometimes really
Mhm.
tough, right? So what you have to do is that you have to trigger your mind into allowing you to take that first step,
Mhm.
and the
Mhm.
smaller you can make that first step, the better. So the smaller you can kind of tell yourself, okay, this is just a little thing I need to go forward, the better. So try to think of how you can trunk whatever you are looking for here. How can you chunk it up into small pieces? So what would be the first little tiny thing you could do to take the first step in the direction you want to go in? That's one thing you could do. Another tool that I also think is quite interesting is actually looking at what you're after. So many people, they tend to create their goals around a certain thing. Now, a very simple example here. I want to run a marathon,
Mhm.
right? Instead, I would go with trying to force yourself into identity goals instead. And then saying, I don't want to run a marathon. I want to be a sublime runner, right? Because the other way you can kind of
Mhm.
feel the difference. Here you're just looking towards a certain specific goal. What happens then when you have run that marathon? What will you then do? Whereas if you're a supreme runner, then you kind of can evolve around it, right? And you can build all your habits around that identity goal as well, because then you can start asking yourself, okay, to become a supreme runner, what do I then need to do? Maybe I need to do a different training. Maybe I need to eat differently or sleep differently or something else like that. So you can kind of anchor all the habits and all the stuff you do back to this identity goal.
Mhm.
So it's quite interesting, also from a
Mhm.
from an organizational point of view, like to look differently on how we actually achieve our goals. This is something that James Clear from Atomic Habits, you might
Mhm.
know him.
Yep.
He talks a lot about. So I think he has some really brilliant tools in terms of working with these identity based goals
Mhm.
instead.
Yes, I love that. I am familiar with the book. I've read the book and I forgot about the shift to identity rather than behavioral goals. And when
Yeah,
you're saying, I'm like, yes, this is brilliant. And I think of these commitments as growing legs. So it's one thing, like you said, if it's just a marathon, I run and I run and I run a little more and I check off the marathon and then maybe I'm stuck because I achieved that one goal. But you're right,
exactly.
when you're thinking about being a really excellent runner, there's a lot more that goes into that than just this one outcome at the end.
Plus, it's also easy when you have these different identity goals in your life, then you can
Mhm.
also measure everything up against it. So you can kind of say,
Mm.
okay, the direction I'm going in right now here, that's not really helping my identity goal, right?
Mhm.
So maybe I should do something differently. And what also happens
Mhm.
is that when you really go deep and then it's something you identify yourself with, then it's
Mhm.
also easier for you to hold on to whatever habits and stuff you need to do to go in that direction. Because we know,
Mhm.
all of us knows, right, that there will be days where
Mhm.
you fall in. And
Yep.
that's another
Mhm.
very important thing also from an organizational point of view. I
Mhm.
see so many times not any kinds of slack or any kinds of behavioral framework in place to actually help people bounce back to the good habit,
Mhm.
right? So that's
Yeah.
another reason why we often fail
Yeah.
in these transformations, because we don't have that framework in place. So
Mm.
but back to these identity goals, if you're actually working with that, then it's going to be easier for you to bounce back because it's something you really deeply desire and want to do,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Yep, and
Et for
internal
øjeblikket
instead
kan
of
du ikke stille
external. I mean,
stående
just so many
udstilling
important
af
points.
Kunstmusisk Bibliotek. Du kan spørge mig om at spille en
Okay. Okay. So my next question is for you personally, because you are so accomplished. You do such incredible work. And I'm just wondering, so what tips do you have you're staying current on all of these industry trends, these skills, whether it's technology or like you said, reading these latest books that come out. So what tips do you have for clients, for us, about how to keep up with everything?
I listen to podcasts, Lee.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, but on top of that, of course, also
Mhm.
books and newsletters and that usual
Mhm.
stuff.
Mhm.
Networking events, and a very important thing for me, actually, I surround myself with people who also are
Mhm.
innovative and eager to learn.
Mhm.
So I think the
Mhm.
ecosystem here is very important, actually.
Mhm.
And then I also pick out education. So I continuously also take time
Mhm.
out to educate myself
Mhm.
continuously. So basically, what I do is that I have a system. So I work in flow
Mhm.
myself. I have to take my own medicine, right?
Yes.
So I work in flow. So I'm very, very
Mhm.
conscious about what kind of tasks I do throughout my day. So I have specific time schedules during the day where I do
Mhm.
deep work. And I don't allow meetings in that period because I want to do deep
Mhm.
work.
Yeah.
And then as part of my system as well, I also have weekly time set off for education. And that can be reading certain
Mm.
articles, that
Mhm.
can be doing
Yeah.
some school stuff or whatever it is. But I think with the stuff that is going on right
Mhm.
now, with so much change coming in, I think it's so, so important that we actually take time off to constantly learn, because we
Mhm.
need to adapt quickly all the time. And I
Mhm.
think, for me at least, one of the very important meta skills of the future is quickly adapting and being capable of engaging and interacting with new knowledge all the time, and applying it into something concrete. So
Mhm.
really taking time off is important. And as we were just discussing, our brains need the slack also to learn. We can't expect to take something in just and then move on with everything else going on besides us. So we need to have certain slack to actually take it in, and then you need to work with it, right? So
Mhm.
that's very important. And don't take too much
Mhm.
in at once. So I also
Mhm.
sometimes have, a
Mhm.
bucket list of a lot of stuff I want to do or learn or
Mhm.
listen into. But then I try to prioritize, and then saying, okay, today on this my learning Friday, I'm gonna
Yes.
concentrate on this particular topic, and then that's
Mhm.
what I'm crunching on.
Yeah, and I've never thought of it as an ecosystem, and that is, I'm really visual. I imagine many of the listeners are too, but kind of thinking about how all these webs are tied together and impacting one another, and from having a learning Friday to blocking time on our calendar for work, and like you said, surrounding yourself with others who just always want to be curious, always want to be learning.
Exactly, and it's actually, yeah, people. It's really funny because, as you know, I've worked many years with the innovation and
Mhm.
the creativity and
Yeah.
product development and everything. That's where I come from, right? And people
Mhm.
are kind of afraid. Oh, you're so creative, so you have no systems, you have nothing, right? But it's exactly the opposite. We have
Yep.
a lot of systems because that's what
Mhm.
frees our minds to be creative and innovative. So
Mhm.
it's the opposite. So yes, I have a system, and I
Mhm.
have sit down and I have my calendar, and I
Mhm.
block my things in. So, and then I just
Mhm.
have a promise to myself that this is my square,
Mhm.
where I'm deep working. So no meetings
Mhm.
there. And if it stands there in front of you, it's easier for you to say
Yep.
no to a
Mhm.
person, right?
Yeah.
Than if it's not in your calendar. Because if it's not in your
Mhm.
calendar, then it doesn't exist. And especially in a big organization, right? If people actually make
Mhm.
time in the calendars for certain things, then it's harder to book, because most
Mhm.
of the meetings that can wait a day or some hours or a week even, it's not that
Mhm.
important. It's more to
Yeah.
talk about, what is most important right now, right? We just need to navigate with each other.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm a big fan of
Mhm.
learning sessions. I'm a big fan of
Mhm.
Monday free meetings days,
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
instance, which we have also played a lot around within teams.
Mhm.
Bi-weekly co-sessions where we're just creative, where you have some time set off to actually just be creative, innovative, think deep, do whatever feels interesting for you.
Mhm.
Because that also
Yeah.
recharge you. Because if you're working, especially within, I would say that the teams I mainly work with is within either development or innovation or combination of that, and
Mhm.
it's quite brain heavy, a lot of the stuff you do.
Mhm.
So also freeing up your mind and having time for
Mhm.
actually just flying high is quite
Yeah.
liberal.
Yes. I was just thinking, I'm like, that would be really energizing. And that's something I'm going to to be thinking about as I plan for my next semester and figuring out that boost and that flexibility and that creativity.
Yeah, and then also imagine, because one thing is that you do it yourself, but then if you can get the whole
Mhm.
team or the apartment to actually do it, imagine the power you
Mhm.
get together of actually doing this together.
Mhm.
And then, of course, what you, as the manager of this team, what is really important, what I try to then teach there is that you give the autonomy to actually make that happen. So you need to,
Mhm.
of course, feel, keep the pressure away. So it's quite
Mhm.
interesting, but it's actually interesting how fast that goes, because if you keep saying, no, you can't book this team, you can't book us for meetings on Mondays because we do like that,
Mhm.
then most people actually accept it. So it's just about
Mhm.
the way you tell the story and how you see it
Mhm.
play, right? um,
Mhm. Yeah. Yep. So powerful. Change makers.
exactly.
So I have two final questions for you, and they're related. And so on the communicative leader, we really like to leave our listeners with the pragmatic leadership or communication tips, advice, a challenge. So to start, for our titled leaders out there, our managers, supervisors, all the way up to the C-suite, what advice do you have for those folks?
Yeah, I think one thing that I would like to have people reflect on is actually, what can you let go of today to make room for your own transformation,
Mm,
in terms of what we were
mhm,
just talking, right? And also, ask the same questions to your team. So what can you actually
mhm,
let go of today to make room for this transformation? And what will be the first little step that you can take to start acting on your dream or your goal?
mm. Yeah, I'm writing I'm writing notes because I just it's so powerful, and freeing to I think sometimes we need someone to actually pose the question to us. We have someone has given us permission to do it, and then to also give that grace to our team as well. That's
Exactly.
really communicating a lot.
Mm. And
And
then maybe
so, yeah.
another interesting angle to this could also be to ask yourself if you have a partner in change, because
Mhm,
that's another very
mhm,
powerful thing here, to actually
mhm,
have, as we were discussing, a lot
mhm,
happens when you are more people around it. So who do you have as a partner in change? And that can be an internal person, or in my case, like
mhm,
I'm often that person also to be that partner
mhm,
in change for especially the managers, because they are often flying a bit around there alone in these transformations.
mhm,
But also for teams, it's very powerful when you set up body teams. So you kind of have a
mhm,
body in your team that supports you with these
mhm,
change things, because as a team, you will also fall back. If you have a new system
mhm,
you're trying to learn or relearn, or you're trying
mhm,
to implement agile working or whatever it is, it's a lot of new stuff you need to take in. And there'll be days where you're just bouncing back. So having a body kind of helps you,
mhm.
right? To keep you on track as well, because hopefully that person can then
Uh-huh.
draw you up, and then when you have a bad day, and then the other way around, right?
Yes, exactly. And with that in mind, so we talked about our titled leaders. So, what about all of the other employees across industries, across ranks? What do you want to leave them with?
I think that generally, I think it's very important to be curious and stay open. So the more
Mhm,
curious you are, the more you can actually stay open, the more you can investigate and research,
mhm,
the better. So slow is
mhm.
fast, as we kicked this conversation
Yes.
off with, right? I think
Mhm,
it's so important. I think my most important tool is actually my curiosity.
mhm. And what I love about that is that something that we can start right now. We don't need to spend a bunch of time in trainings. We don't need new technology. It's not expensive, in
No,
terms of a financial or even a time cost, just to say, huh, I'm wondering about that, or what is causing this feeling. And then I think, too, the empowerment of being an investigator, being that researcher, is letting you know you're not just stuck. You have some autonomy and agency here.
exactly. And that's actually also tools in terms of the behavior, right? Because if you feel that you are in control, then you always can do stuff. You are not in a position where you feel stuck or you feel that you're out of lack of
Mhm.
being able to react, right? So it's about giving the control back to yourself.
Yeah. Well, Pia, thank you for sharing your expertise, your time. This has been so insightful and so valuable. I know I'm going to come back to this interview many times, and I know it will really help listeners as well.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to talk to you, Leah.
All right, my friends, that wraps up our conversation today. Until next time, communicate with intention and lead with purpose. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon on the Communicative Leader.